Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you then please be sure to leave a like on this video and to subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And today I am bringing you another episode of quick album reviews, and I, as always, will try to be as quick on these as I can be, but if I have more to say on a particular album, then I will say more about that album. And the release dates for these particular albums that I will be talking about are all over the place, and I am still doing quite a bit of catching up on music because I had a very busy May, so a lot of the albums here will be from April to early May, and then hopefully I will be caught up in June and can talk about some more recent albums in another episode of Quick Album Reviews. But let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get started with the first album I will be discussing on the list. So the first album on this list I was actually planning on doing an individual review of, but now that it's pretty far away from its release, about over a month now, or it was released in early May, I did just figure it would make more sense to include it in an individual album review section. And that is the newest from Sleep Token, titled Even in Arcadia. Now, if you remember from my Sleep Token review from about 2 years back, you will remember that I did have generally positive things to say about it, but I didn't feel quite as positive about it as a lot of people seemed to that year. Now, with that being said, I do understand why Sleep Token got the hype. There's definitely something interesting with the mystery they've built around themselves and their brand of doing very surprising forays into metal and to crushing breakdowns from the pop melodies that they do. It is something that works well for a very viral sound, and especially for YouTube reaction channels bolstering them even further. But at the same time, I can understand why some people, particularly Sleep Token's biggest critics, say that that might be all Sleep Token really has, and when you peel back the layers, there's not much else beyond that gimmick, and it can be a little hard to see them as anything more than a bit of a one-trick pony who uses pop and trap inflections to go into these surprising breakdowns with some lyrics that give an allure of mystery but really are sort of basic relationship anthems when you look at them deeper. And I will say that I lie somewhere in the middle of these two camps of thought. I don't think that Sleep Token are as bad and overrated as some people do, but I also do think that they are put way too high in the contention of conversation over other metal bands that are far better than them in the genre. But nevertheless, let's go ahead and talk about Even in Arcadia, and sadly, I have to say my opinions on this one are very frustrating to me. They're very conflicted. There are parts of this album that I really like, and there's parts of it that I really just cannot stand. And I think this is one where at least to me, the gimmick of what Sleep Token is doing is starting to just feel like that, a little bit of a gimmick. Whereas I do think the gimmick was interesting in a lot of places on Take Me Back to Eden, and I did think the commentary with the lyrics was a lot more interesting there too. Here, it does make sense to me that Sleep Token would want to go on a journey of talking about their relationship with fame, especially because of how suddenly they blew up with The Summoning and Chokehold in the last 2 years, and they just got into the huge cultural lexicon, and this album has made them even bigger. I think that there are some really good moments on this album. I think the opening track, Look to Windward, is excellent. It really does a good job of building the tension in the album and really establishing the main theme of the album, which is Sleep Token looking on their relationship with fame and how it has both helped them but also affected them in their personal lives, sometimes in very dark ways. I think it's a really interesting way to begin the album, and the just explosion that happens at the end I think is very well earned. I think Damocles is probably my favorite on the album, and this one actually I think thrives in its simplicity. It is a pretty straightforward power ballad and is using the Greek myth of Damocles in interesting ways. I do like the piano in it, and I think the way it shifts from piano ballad to more power ballad when the guitars come in is a natural progression, and it's definitely one of the most pleasant to the ear songs on the album. I really just like everything it does. It is a very fun song It could end up being one of my favorite songs of the year. I really do like what it's doing. The closer, Infinite Bass, is just massive. I really love this song. It is pretty freaking impressive in what it does. And I like the theme of the band talking about how they can do all sorts of different things because they aren't afraid to delve into other genres. It's a very interesting way to end the album, and the crushing breakdown is, I think, easily the heaviest and most impressive moment we've gotten from Sleep Token thus far. And for all my complicated feelings about Emergence, there are some positive things I have to say about the song. I do think that the verses before the sort of triplet rapped vocals that Vessel does in the beginning of the song are well done. I do like the chorus generally and think it's very pleasant to the ears. And I mean, I love that saxophone. It is just gorgeous and a truly jaw-dropping and excellent way to end off the song. I just wish I could definitively say I love the whole song, but I did want to give special shout out to those parts, because those parts I do like. And this does lead me logically into some of my complicated feelings I have about this album, because for every part of this album I do enjoy, there are other parts that I cannot stand and find to be thoroughly annoying. This album sees Sleep Token embracing their pop side more explicitly than they ever have in the past, and I think several times that can be to their detriment, because a lot of songs on here end up coming across as incredibly basic or very eye-roll worthy. I cannot stand Provider. I think it's one of the worst songs of the year so far. Not maybe as bad as Do You Wish That You Loved Me from Take Me Back to Eden, but this one is still pretty bad, and the lyrics in it make me cringe hard. I also find Past Self to be an absolute nothing burger with these twinkling keys that come across as childish and annoying. I think that Dangerous has some interesting elements into it, but ultimately adds up to being not much of anything. And I think that Gethsemane, while I do like elements of it, it comes across as Sleep Token pulling the same trick again of having softer elements in the song, then building up to a breakdown that comes out of nowhere and doesn't feel like it fits into the rest of the album. And that's what bothers me the most about this, is that Sleep Token is making their identity, their penchant for doing this, a repeated thing that happens, and it becomes less special each time. The title track, I do think it has some good stuff going for it, but it's one that I don't see myself returning to that much. And yeah, Caramel, oh man, I wish I had more positive to say about this one musically, because lyrically it's one of the most intriguing on the album in talking about Sleep Token's relationship with their fans, and specifically how fans have tried to unmask them without their consent and trying to dox them and their identity. And I can't imagine how horrific and violating that would be. I really do feel for Vessel in the song, but musically the song is just a bit of a disaster in my opinion. I just do not really like the trap elements in it. Vessel's vocals in some points are so obnoxiously to the front, it hurts my ears. And I really feel like the breakdown here is the most forced one out of the whole album. It just does not work, especially in combination with these pop singing vocals from Vessel that sound just dreadfully out of place. So at the end of the day, when I add up the elements that I do like of this album and the elements I don't, it leaves me feeling conflicted and not sure what to think overall of this album. There's some good stuff, even great stuff going on in here, but there's also some stuff that I just do not like. I cannot passionately say that this is a bad album. I don't really think that, but I can't say it's a good album either. Instead, it's one that is just a very confusing experience, and one that left me just feeling frustrated. 2.5 out of 5 stars. I wish I had something more definitive to say in terms of my opinion on this album. Next up is the newest album by Landmarks, The Darkest Place I've Ever Been, and I found this album to be a pretty fun metalcore release. I was first enamored by this band when I first heard the song Creature, which came out actually in 2024, and I really love the combination of rapping that the vocalist does with this sort of nu metal style, and then his very intense screaming, as well as his unique singing voice that I think could be an acquired taste for some, but I did really like it and found it to give this epic anthemic feeling that made the song work all the more better for me. Now, I will say that this album isn't necessarily the most unique thing out there you're going to hear in the metalcore space, But I do think the band puts enough of their identity into it to make it interesting. I do like the new metal rapping that occurs in songs like Sulfur or Deep Inferno, along with some of the more traditional metalcore elements that appear in a song like A Line in the Dust or the really good metalcore ballad Blood Red. I think my favorite song on here has to come in Novelists du Temps. This song is haunting, and it really does earn its 5.5 minute runtime. I love the places it goes and the gorgeous ending that it has. It is a very powerful moment on this album that I think stands pretty tall for this band and works very well and could end up being one of my favorite songs of the year. I think that this album sort of thrives in keeping things pretty simplistic in the metalcore that it is doing. It isn't taking too many risks, which I think is actually okay for what this album is doing, and the band is staying pretty much within the genre that they are comfortable with doing, and I respect them for that. There aren't too many negatives on here. I suppose that maybe Requiem isn't super memorable to me, or the closer track Funeral. I do think the album closes on a less memorable note than it could, but I do still like what those two tracks are doing okay enough. They're just not as interesting to me as others. But for every one of those sort of negative points I have, there are some real positives. I think The Great Unknown is uncannily like Linkin Park. It's actually wild how much they channel that, and the lead vocalist sounds like Chester Bennington. And the huge highlights on here like Creature, La Valse du Temps, or Sulfur and Blood Red really do stand out well. I'm going to be giving this album a strong 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is an album that I don't really have much to say about, which is why I put this in quick album reviews, but that is the new Bury Tomorrow album. I think this release is generally fine. I think I like the previous Bury Tomorrow album a little better, and think it has more interesting stuff going for it. But there are some good parts to this album. I just don't think it has any big standout moments like Abandon Us did from their previous album. I do like Villain Arc, and I like the intense screams from Danny Winter Bates on that one. That's a very impressive track. What If I Burn is a big epic moment on the album that I think is pretty impressive, and I like that Danny gets to sing on the song. The new clean vocalist continues to prove himself well on this album, especially in a song like Found No Throne, which is just a gorgeous ballad that I really loved. And the closer Paradox is quite impressive as well. But I do find this album to be a bit forgettable outside of some good guitar riffs in it. I didn't really find many of the choruses to be memorable here, unlike some of the very catchy ones on the last album. And there are definitely places where the songs can just sort of fade into one another, in my opinion. I can't really say there's any point I definitively hate on the album. I think the only song that didn't really get to me that much was Silence Isn't Helping Us. But at the same time, I didn't really find many songs that really blew me away either, outside of maybe Villain Arc, Yokai, and Found No Throne. But, I mean, a lot of this album is just sort of bleeding into one another. It's a good album, but it's one that I felt like could have been a lot more, and I felt like it had a little bit of wasted potential. Still, solid 3 out of 5 stars on this one. Next up is an album from a band that I have been very excited to hear, and that is Sleep Theory's newest Afterglow. I heard this band live when I went to watch a Beartooth concert, and I was very impressed by their live performance. They put on something really impressive, and I really thought they had a lot of potential as a new band. Yeah, they're very much so indebted to their influences of especially Linkin Park, and I would say Sevendust to an extent as well. But I do think that they are bringing a fresh spin to the sound, especially with the incorporation of metalcore elements that I do think works when they really push it forward. An example of that on this album is the title track 3, which is just truly impressive and has some excellent screams from the lead vocalist. I also find the title track to be really good, just a great ballad with some beautiful moments. I think it's a pretty solid relationship anthem, as well as the opener Static just really gets your feet moving as a very energetic opener to the album. There are also some undeniably catchy moments on this album, such as the appropriately titled Stuck in My Head, which I have not been able to get out of my head. It is a lot of fun, and it doesn't actually force the millennial whoop in it. I think it actually works for where it is placed. And yeah, I think the album is quite a bit of fun. Now, does it have much beyond that? I'm not sure. I think there is a lot of good style here, and I do like the influences that the band has, and the lead vocalist is undeniably talented, but I just wish they would push forward a little bit more. I think they could do a lot more as they take more risks. And I'm putting this partly on the fact that this band is new to the scene and they are still dipping their toes in different waters. But if they did more songs like 3, for an example, I think they would really have something special on their hands. I really hope they continue to push forward, but this is a very exciting debut from them, and I really can't wait to see what they do next. Solid 3 out of 5 stars for this one. Next up is the newest album from Novelists, a French band entitled CODA. I was intrigued by this band with the fact that they were changing vocalists from a male to a female vocalist, which was controversial when their first single, the title track for this album, came out, I remember. And I do remember not necessarily being wowed by everything that the track had to offer, even though I did definitely see some potential in it. But I was definitely a lot more intrigued to check out this album when I heard the second single, All for Nothing, in which Camille Contreras really showed off her vocal range and had some impressive moments on the song. And I love the progressive guitar work in the song. It was very unique, and I am happy to say that it really worked for me. I think this is a pretty great metalcore album from front to back with some rock elements in it as well that make it feel a little bit nostalgic. It is a very fun release with some really pretty cool risk-taking moments in it as well, and some of the more progressive elements that the album shows off. Just right off the bat, songs like Sleepless Nights and In Heaven are just massively impressive in terms of what they do in their runtimes. They aren't necessarily even that long, but the things they do with the progression of their songs is very impressive. I find In Heaven in particular to be just absolutely stunning and breathtaking, just some gorgeous, gorgeous moments on it, and Camille's vocals just really soar to excellent heights on it. That goes for Sleepless Nights as well. I like the thematic arc that that song goes on. And then they do have some moments on here that feel nostalgic and reminiscent of 2000s rock, such as the opening track, Say My Name, with a chorus that just feels instantly iconic. And I really like the closer, KO, as well. Just a very powerful closer that left me feeling very impacted by this album. Yeah, there's not that much negative I have to say about this album. I really like what it does, and I really like Camille's range. Her screams are impressive and sort of bring to mind screams that Lizzie Hale of Hailstorm would do, except maybe executed a bit better. And yeah, I think when this album shines, it shines really bright. Sleepless Nights, In Heaven, KO, Say My Name, and All for Nothing are all truly impressive moments on this album. I also really do like the more French spoken tracks such as Maldition de la Bruja or 78 Rue, both very interesting tracks. I don't have that many complaints about this album. I think that maybe CODA is still not a very interesting song to me, and I do think maybe marks the most negative moment on the album, and even at that isn't that terrible. And Adam and Eve doesn't necessarily stick out to me in any particular way, although I do think it has some interesting commentary about religion in it that is more nuanced than you might expect. But yeah, this album is pretty great. I really liked what it had to offer, and I'm going to be giving it a strong 4 out of 5 stars. And finally, let's end off with a band that I've been following for quite some time, one of the best Christian metalcore acts out there, and one of the most underrated too, and Wolves at the Gate with their newest Wasteland. Now, Wolves at the Gate had a pretty tall order to follow up on, especially coming off of 2 of their most impressive albums to date. I love both Eclipse and Eulogies. They both are excellent albums in their own right and both have really impressive things that they do. This album sees them embracing mainstream metalcore probably the most they ever have, I would say. It definitely embraces what modern mainstream metalcore bands like, I would say, Fit for a King or Silent Planet or bands like that are doing, and especially in embracing more electronic elements. And I do think it generally works to their benefit on this album, although I do think it is a step down from both Eulogies and Eclipse. This is a concept album. I think it is a pretty well executed concept album as well, and feels like a very relevant one to our times in talking about the wasteland of both the world and the personal wasteland of an individual person who feels broken and lost and is trying to find their way to redemption, but seems to be just encompassed by darkness at every turn. Wolves at the Gate is not afraid to delve into the worst parts of the human consciousness and human nature, and I think that does make this album's title feel earned, and does make the ending redemption feel earned as well, because it feels like the journey was worth it. I think Parasite is a superb song. It was a great choice for a lead single, and definitely just establishes the dark world we're living in very well, and this dystopian wasteland. It is very well done. The Synthetic Sun is probably my favorite song on the album. I just really love the chorus. The chorus reminds me the most of classic Wolves at the Gate, which is probably why I like it so much. And the song is just embracing its sense of fun. I really like how catchy it is. And I think it does the best at embracing the electronic elements that the whole album is going for. False Devils is an interesting track in talking about how we idolize people who are constantly throwing up false smoke signals, metaphorically, and we idolize them for that without realizing the deception that is hiding underneath. Definitely, conceptually, one of the best written songs on the album, with a chorus that really stands tall. And Memento Mori is a truly impressive moment on the album as well. Definitely one of the most heartfelt and redemptive here. I do wish we had gotten a couple more moments of levity on the album like this one, but this one stands all the brighter because of that. And I do think the closer, Unrest, is pretty impressive, even though I do think it's a little bit messy in all of the genre hopping that it's trying to do. I do still respect Wolves of the Gate for trying such an ambitious song like this. They've always had ambitious closers, and I do think this one is one of their most ambitious. And while it may not work as some of their better closers from previous albums, I do still generally like what it's going for. And if I were to give a general negative of this album, I would say that unlike Eulogies, it does sort of blend together. And while I do think it is a good coat of paint for them, I don't think it's as interesting as the metalcore that they were doing on their past two albums. And it does feel distinctly modern and distinctly a little bit different for them, even though I do still think it works for their identity. There are a couple songs on here that just don't stand out to me much. I do think that Death Clock is maybe one of my least favorite Wolves at the Gate songs. I don't really like the stuttering of time or tick. I just don't think it works well, and I do find it to be a little bit of a cheesy version of a song about how you are limited in your time on Earth and you aren't sure how to use it. I also find songs like, unfortunately, the title track, Law of the Wasteland, to not really work too much for me, and certain songs just sort of come and go without leaving much of an impact, such as Wasting or Wanting. Those interludes specifically are not very memorable on the album. I think that maybe Wandering is the only one that really stood out to me as memorable, but the other ones just sort of come and go. But this is still a very solid album, and I do still think that it shows that Wolves of the Gate doesn't really have a bad album to their name. And they prove to continue to be one of the most consistent metalcore bands. I love how they're continuing to be bold about their faith, while still making sure to write it in a way that is interesting and engaging to the listener. Strong 3.5 out of 5 stars for this one. So yeah, that ends this episode of Quick Album Reviews. What were your thoughts on any of the albums I talked about? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video, and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you on the next video.